The vampire king pretended to sleep to test the maid, but what she did in the dark left him frozen. Shadows clung to the battlements as the wind whispered through the empty corridors. Many villagers spoke in hushed tones of the vampire king who ruled within, Kale, a being of centuries, whose gaze could chill the soul. They said he held both beauty and terror, and that no human had ever walked freely in his halls without trembling. Yet tonight, a new presence would stir within those ancient walls. Ilara, a young maid of quiet strength and keen intuition, had arrived to serve the castle. She carried nothing but a small bag of belongings and a heart brimming with courage. Though her hands were accustomed to work and her life had known hardship, she felt a strange thrill in standing before the great gates, staring up at the looming towers where shadows moved as if alive. Ilara had heard the stories of vampires, curses, and kings who never slept, but she had never known fear the way one does when standing so close to legend. As she passed the towering doors, a chill ran down her spine, yet her steps were steady. She reminded herself that she was a servant here, nothing more, nothing less. A maid's courage was measured in small acts, not in tales of heroism. Still, the castle seemed to watch her, as though the walls themselves were alive, whispering secrets that only the brave, or the foolish, might hear. The grand hall she entered was vast and dimly lit. Tapestries faded with age depicted long-forgotten battles and ceremonies, their colors muted, yet still radiant in flickering torchlight. The air was cool and smelled faintly of old stone and dust. Ilara's eyes adjusted to the gloom, taking in the glittering chandeliers and polished floors that reflected shadow and torch alike. Somewhere above, the wind moaned through the towers, carrying a distant, sorrowful sound, like a song that had been lost to time. A servant appeared, an older woman with eyes sharp as a hawk. She spoke in a low, urgent tone, guiding Ilara to her chamber. "The king is particular," the woman warned. "Do not wake him unnecessarily, and do not wander the halls after dark. The castle does not forgive mistakes lightly." Ilara nodded, though her curiosity flared. "I understand," she said softly. Yet in her chest, a heartbeat of anticipation grew. She wondered what lay behind the closed doors of Kale's chamber, what secrets were hidden in the shadows. Night fell fully, and the castle became a realm of darkness and whispering stone. In his chamber, Kale lay upon a bed of black silk, perfectly still. His long hair spread across the pillow like midnight, and his face, pale as moonlight, betrayed nothing. The vampire king, as ever, seemed immortal, yet tonight he was not merely resting. He was watching, pretending sleep, testing the courage of the one who had dared enter his world. Ilara carried a lantern to the far end of the hallway, the light trembling as she moved. Her task was simple: tidy the king's private quarters. Yet the castle's silence was heavy, almost alive. Her footsteps echoed in soft rhythms, a heartbeat within the stone. She approached the grand chamber door, her hand trembling ever so slightly as she pushed it open. The room was vast, dominated by the king's enormous bed, draped in deep crimson and black velvet. Kale lay there, his chest rising and falling slowly. The sigil on his chest glimmered faintly under the lantern's light, a soft, magical glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. Ilara froze for a moment. She had never seen anything so delicate, so full of hidden power. Her instinct told her this mark was important, that it held secrets she could not yet understand. Compelled by curiosity, Ilara stepped closer. She knelt beside the bed, her fingers hovering over the sigil. A strange warmth spread from her hand as she touched it lightly, almost reverently. In that instant, the castle seemed to hold its breath. The air grew colder, and shadows deepened around her. She did not notice that Kale's eyes, hidden beneath the veil of sleep, opened slowly, observing her every movement. Kale felt a chill unlike any other, a mixture of surprise and something he could not name. Humans rarely dared such proximity, rarely acted with fearless curiosity. Her touch was gentle, but it stirred an ancient part of him he had long suppressed, the part that remembered love, trust, and longing. For the first time in centuries, he felt vulnerable, frozen in the presence of a human who showed neither fear nor reverence, only courage and quiet wonder. Elara withdrew her hand and whispered to herself, unsure why her heart beat so fast. It's beautiful," she murmured, her voice carrying a mix of awe and respect. The sigil pulsed faintly beneath her fingers as though acknowledging her presence. She did not see Kale's gaze, sharp and immovable, watching her with a strange intensity. Suddenly, a soft knock echoed from the hall, startling Elara. She turned, lantern shaking, realizing the hour had grown late. Her training reminded her, a maid must not linger, must not overstep. She straightened, curtsied to the empty bed, and whispered a promise she barely understood herself. "I will be careful, I will serve well." Kale's lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly. Though his expression remained composed, a flicker of emotion crossed his eyes. The test had begun, and yet he could not predict the outcome. A human who touched him without fear, who moved with respect yet curiosity. What would she do next? Could she withstand the darkness of his world? The next day, the castle buzzed with quiet tension. Elara moved with grace among the corridors, her hands deftly cleaning and organizing, yet her mind wandered to the night before. She could not shake the memory of the sigil, the pulsing warmth, or the feeling that something extraordinary had stirred in the heart of the cold, untouchable king. Meanwhile, Kale observed from the shadows, concealed by his mastery of the dark. He noted every careful movement, every glance of wonder that Elara cast upon his home. There was a lightness in her presence that was alien to the castle, a small warmth that contrasted the centuries of cold stone and silence. And he felt, for the first time in eons, an unfamiliar pull, a longing not for power or fear, but for something far more fragile, far more human. Elara's courage did not go unnoticed by the castle's spirits either. Whispers followed her, soft and murmuring, approving of her bravery and resilience. The castle itself seemed to breathe, responding to her presence, acknowledging that she was not merely a servant but a force capable of change. Even Kale, though bound by centuries of pride and curse, could not ignore the shift. Night fell again, and with it, a sense of anticipation. Kale lay once more, pretending to sleep, eyes hidden beneath the illusion of rest. He wondered if the human would act as before, if she would dare approach him in the quiet, unguarded hours. The shadows of the castle lengthened, stretching across the walls and floors, as though aware that something extraordinary was unfolding. Elara, too, felt the pull of the night. She carried a small candle to Kale's chamber, her curiosity once more outweighing caution. Her fingers brushed the door handle, her heart beating in a rhythm that matched the faint glow of the sigil within. She remembered the first night, the shock she had felt, the strange warmth beneath her touch. Something told her that the king was more than legend, that the stories of his heartlessness were only part of the truth. Stepping inside, she moved with quiet reverence, careful not to disturb the stillness. She approached the bed, eyes fixed on the sigil, fingers trembling slightly as she reached toward it. A whisper escaped her lips, more to herself than to anyone else. "I do not understand you, yet I feel your pain, your loneliness." Kale, still hidden in shadow, felt the words pierce deeper than any blade. For centuries, no human had spoken to him of loneliness without fear. And now, one human dared to touch the essence of his soul without knowing the danger she courted. He felt frozen not from fear, but from a sudden, overwhelming awe. Elara withdrew her hand once more, sensing something in the air, a charge that made her pulse quicken. The castle seemed to exhale, the darkness no longer merely empty but alive, filled with anticipation. She turned to leave, heart pounding, unaware that the vampire king had opened his eyes fully now, watching her every movement, every silent thought. In that moment, Kale realized something he had not felt in centuries. A flicker of hope, a spark of connection, and a curiosity about the human who dared touch what no one else would. And Alara, walking away through the echoing halls, felt a strange sense of destiny, as though her life had been entwined with the castle, and with its dark, silent master, from the very first step. Outside, the wind howled around Duskfall Castle, carrying the secrets of shadows and whispers of hearts yet unbound. Within, a test had begun, silent and unseen, a test of courage, loyalty, and perhaps of something far more powerful. Neither king nor maid could yet know where this night, and the nights to come, would lead. And in the deepest chamber of all, Kale's voice barely whispered to himself, unheard by any human ear, yet filled with a weight of centuries. Who are you to touch my heart without fear? The morning after the night that had left Kale frozen, Duskfall Castle seemed quieter than usual. Even the wind held its breath as if it sensed the shift that had taken place within the walls. Alara moved through the halls with careful purpose, her hands busy with chores, yet her mind kept returning to the sigil on Kale's chest. Its faint glow haunted her thoughts, like a secret she was only beginning to understand. Kale, meanwhile, remained in his chambers, watching her from the shadows. His centuries-old instincts told him to keep distance, to observe and test rather than act, yet he found himself drawn to her. There was something about her courage, her quiet strength, that unsettled him in ways he had not felt in hundreds of years. His heart, if he could still call it that, felt a strange tension between caution and curiosity. By midday, the castle's daily rhythms resumed. Servants moved quickly through the corridors, carrying trays of food and cleaning the grand halls, but Ilara's movements drew subtle attention. She worked with diligence, yet her eyes were often drawn to the higher towers or the flicker of shadowy corners. It was as though she could sense the castle's secrets, the way it breathed around Kale. Kale decided it was time to confront her, though he would do so with subtlety. He appeared in the hall, seemingly by accident, his presence sudden and commanding. Alara paused mid-step, bowing her head instinctively. She had learned quickly that Kale's gaze alone could silence a room, but something in the way he looked at her today was different. There was no accusation, no cold detachment, only an unreadable intensity. "Alara," he said, his voice low, smooth, and strangely melodic, "tell me, why do you touch what you do not understand?" Alara looked up, her heart racing but her voice steady. "I felt it was important," she replied, choosing her words carefully. "It felt like it needed protection or recognition. I do not understand it fully, but I could not leave it alone." Kale's eyes narrowed slightly, studying her face. Humans rarely spoke with such sincerity, and fewer still acted with such fearless curiosity. He felt a pull in his chest, a sensation he had long thought impossible, an urge to trust, or at least to consider trust. Yet centuries of solitude and caution whispered warnings to him. "Very well," he said finally, turning away. "We shall see if your courage is more than curiosity. Follow my instructions tonight and you may prove your worth." Alara's pulse quickened. She had expected nothing, yet now a challenge had been laid before her. "I will do my best," she said softly, and though she did not fully understand what she had agreed to, she felt a spark of anticipation she could not ignore. As evening fell, the castle transformed once again. Shadows stretched across the halls, and the air grew thick with the scent of night-blooming flowers from the gardens below. Kale led Alara to a side chamber, one rarely used, its walls lined with ancient tomes and arcane symbols. He instructed her to retrieve a small, sealed box from the top shelf, a task that required climbing a rickety ladder. The room itself seemed alive, responding to the presence of the king and the maid. Candles flickered as if whispering secrets, and the shadows twisted and shifted as if testing her resolve. Alara approached the ladder with cautious determination, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down upon her. She climbed carefully, the wood creaking beneath her feet, and reached for the box. As her fingers touched the cool surface of the lid, a sudden gust of wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing several candles. Shadows danced wildly across the walls, forming shapes that seemed almost human, watching her. Alara froze for a moment, heart pounding, but she did not step back. Taking a deep breath, she lifted the box and descended the ladder carefully. Kale watched silently, hidden in a shadowed corner. A mixture of admiration and unease stirred within him. The human dared the darkness, dared the unknown, and faced it without fear. Yet he could feel the castle itself responding to her presence. The old magic seemed to hum more strongly, pulsing in recognition of her courage. Once she placed the box on the table, Kale finally stepped forward, his presence commanding the room. "You have courage," he said quietly, "but courage alone is not enough. The castle tests not only your bravery but your heart. Tonight you will face a deeper trial." Alara's eyes widened. "A trial?" she asked, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension in her voice. Kale nodded. "Yes, there are forces within these walls, spirits bound by old curses and shadows that guard secrets. You must navigate the corridors alone and retrieve an item hidden within the East Tower. Only then will you prove your worth." Her breath caught. The East Tower was said to be the most dangerous part of the castle, where shadows held memories of ancient betrayals and unfinished sorrows. Yet she did not hesitate. "I understand," she said, her voice steady despite the chill in the air. As night fell, Alara prepared for the trial. She moved quietly through the castle, lantern in hand, her senses alert to every whisper of wind, every flicker of shadow. The corridors seemed to shift, as though the castle itself were testing her resolve. Portraits of long-dead kings and queens seemed to watch her passage, their eyes following her every step. At the foot of the stairs leading to the East Tower, a sudden chill gripped her. Shadows moved against the walls, forming shapes that seemed almost alive. Her pulse quickened, yet she pressed forward, determined not to show fear. She climbed the winding staircase, each step echoing in the silence until she reached the tower's upper chamber. Inside, the room was filled with darkness so complete it felt as though the light itself had been swallowed. She could hear whispers, soft and indistinct, like echoes of conversations long past. The box she sought rested on a pedestal in the center of the room, bathed in a faint glow from a single enchanted candle. Alara approached carefully. As she reached for the box, the shadows shifted suddenly, forming a wall of darkness between her and her goal. She froze, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon her. Then, remembering Kale's words, she took a deep breath and stepped forward, letting courage guide her. The shadows recoiled slightly, as if acknowledging her bravery. Her hands closed around the box, and for a moment the chamber was silent save for her breathing. She turned to leave, and the shadows parted, allowing her passage. As she descended the staircase, she felt a strange sense of connection to the castle, as though the walls themselves recognized her determination and heart. Yet when she returned to the chamber where Kale awaited, she realized that the trial was not yet complete. The box contained a key not for a door but for a secret within Kale himself, something that had been locked away for centuries. Kale's eyes met hers as she placed the key before him. "You have done well," he said, his voice soft, almost unrecognizable. Few humans could face the darkness of this castle without faltering. Yet there is more to your trial than bravery. You must understand trust and patience. Alara's eyes met his, filled with curiosity and a hint of wonder. "I will do whatever is needed," she said, sincerity in every word. "I want to understand and to help if I can." Kale felt a strange tension in his chest. Her words, her courage, and her willingness to face what others feared awakened something within him. He had spent centuries alone, guarding his heart against betrayal, against fear, against longing. And yet, here was a human who dared to reach beyond the ordinary, who dared to touch a part of him that had been untouched for centuries. The night deepened and the castle seemed to breathe around them. Kale allowed himself a fleeting thought, one he had not permitted in ages. Could this human, this maid, be more than a servant? Could she be someone who would understand the loneliness, the sorrow, and the power that he carried? Ilara, standing quietly, felt a connection she could not explain. The castle was no longer merely walls and shadows. It was alive with history, magic, and secrets. And in the center of it all was Kale, a figure of power, mystery, and danger. Yet instead of fear, she felt a strange fascination, an urge to understand him and the world he ruled. Kale finally spoke again, his voice breaking the silence of the chamber. Tonight you have faced the shadows and walked where others would flee. But know this, the castle tests more than courage. It tests your heart, your resolve, and your understanding of me. Ilara nodded. I am ready, she said quietly. I will do my best, even if I do not yet understand everything. Kale studied her for a long moment, and a rare expression of softness crossed his features. We shall see, he murmured, before turning to the window, letting the night air swirl around him. Outside, the wind carried whispers of the ancient castle, whispers that spoke of challenges yet to come, dangers and secrets that would test both of them. And as the candlelight flickered, casting long shadows across the walls, Kale realized that for the first time in centuries, he was not entirely alone. The human before him, brave and kind, had entered the darkness willingly, and in doing so had begun to unravel the cold, unyielding layers of his immortal heart. For the first time he wondered, not about power nor fear nor control, but about trust. And he knew, deep within him, that the night had only just begun. The castle exhaled around them, carrying the promise of trials yet to come, of shadows yet to be faced, and of a bond that neither time nor magic could fully explain. The night after her trial in the East Tower, Ilara could not sleep. She lay on the small cot in her chamber, listening to the distant whispers of the castle walls. Duskfall Castle was alive in ways that no human could ever fully understand. The wind seemed to carry voices from centuries past, murmuring secrets of kings and queens, of betrayals and courage, of shadows that remembered every step taken within the stone halls. Her thoughts returned again and again to Kale, the vampire king. She had touched the sigil, faced the darkness, and returned with the key that unlocked a part of him she could not yet see. And yet, what troubled her most was not the fear, but the fascination she felt toward him. He was a being of great power and mystery, yet there was something fragile beneath the surface, a loneliness that seemed almost unbearable. Kale, in his chamber, sat before the tall window overlooking the cliffs. Moonlight poured in, casting silver patterns across his pale features. He had spent centuries mastering control over his desires, his powers, and his heart. Humans were fragile and fleeting, yet Ilara was different. Her courage, her insight, her quiet determination, it unsettled him in ways he could not anticipate. He found himself replaying the night's events over and over, watching her approach the shadows, feeling the pulse of the sigil beneath her hand. The next day, Kale summoned Ilara to the grand hall. The sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Ilara approached cautiously, her steps quiet but steady, and bowed lightly. Ilara, Kale said, his voice measured but carrying an undercurrent of curiosity, you have shown bravery, yet the castle is not yet done testing you. There are forces here that do not yield to courage alone. They demand understanding, patience, and loyalty. Ilara's eyes met his, unwavering. I will do what I must, she said. I want to learn to help and to understand. Kale studied her for a long moment. Humans rarely spoke with such sincerity. Few could remain steady in the presence of the unknown, much less in the presence of a being like him. And yet, here she was, unafraid, her heart open and steady, even when shadows and secrets surrounded her. He led her to the castle's undercroft, a place steeped in history and old magic. The walls were lined with shelves of ancient books, jars of strange herbs, and artifacts that hummed faintly with arcane energy. Shadows shifted and moved as though alive, whispering warnings and secrets in a language Alara could not fully understand. "Your next task," Kale said, "requires more than courage. You must enter the shadowed corridors below, where spirits linger, and retrieve a vial of light from the chamber at the far end. It is a test of endurance, trust, and intuition. Few humans have returned from that place without faltering." Alara swallowed, feeling a thrill of fear mixed with excitement. "I will do it," she said. "Tell me what I must know to survive." Kale's expression softened, though only slightly. "Trust the shadows and do not fear them. They will respond to your heart more than your hands. Remember, you are not alone, yet you must rely on yourself above all else." As night fell, Alara descended into the undercroft. The corridors were narrow, lined with cold stone and flickering sconces. Shadows moved in ways that seemed almost deliberate, forming shapes that reminded her of people, animals, and things she could not name. Each step echoed, and the faint hum of magic vibrated through the walls. She held her lantern high, careful to keep her balance on the uneven floors. Every so often, whispers brushed against her ears, carrying fragments of ancient conversations. Some voices were mournful, others playful, and a few were warning her to turn back. But Alara pressed forward, guided by the flickering light in the distance that marked the chamber she sought. The shadows grew thicker as she approached. At times, they seemed to stretch out toward her, testing her resolve. Her pulse quickened, but she reminded herself of Kale's words. "The shadows respond to your heart." Taking a deep breath, she moved with steady steps, focusing on courage and clarity, letting her intuition guide her through the maze of darkness. Finally, she reached the chamber at the far end of the corridor. A single beam of light illuminated the vial she sought, resting atop a pedestal. As she reached for it, the shadows around her stirred violently, forming shapes that reached for her. She froze, feeling the energy in the room surge, and then quietly she whispered to the darkness, acknowledging its presence. "I do not fear you," she said. "I am here to honor this place, not to harm it." The shadows seemed to pause, then slowly receded, allowing her to take the vial. Its light was soft but steady, glowing like a small star held in her hands. She turned to leave, guided by the faint glimmer of the lantern and the memory of Kale's advice. The shadows parted, and the corridor seemed less threatening now, as though acknowledging her respect and courage. When she returned to Kale, he was waiting at the top of the staircase, his eyes studying her with a mixture of admiration and something deeper, almost unrecognizable. She held out the vial, and he took it carefully, the glow reflecting in his pale eyes. "You have done well," Kale said. "Few humans could navigate the undercroft and return unharmed. Your courage and intuition are remarkable." Alara felt a flush of pride, but also a quiet tension. She could sense that Kale's praise was not merely for her success, but also for the way she had faced the unknown and remained herself. Kale's voice softened, almost imperceptibly. "Yet this is only the beginning. The castle has more to show you, and you have much to learn. Courage alone will not suffice. Trust, patience, and understanding are just as necessary." Alara nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She realized that her journey was not merely about completing tasks or proving herself. It was about earning trust and navigating a world she had only glimpsed. The castle, Kale, and the shadows were all testing her, guiding her, and challenging her in ways she had never imagined. As the days passed, the bond between them grew subtly. Kale observed her from the shadows, noting the way she moved, the careful thought in her actions, and the quiet courage that defined her. Alara, in turn, found herself thinking of Kale often, wondering about the centuries he had lived, the burdens he carried, and the secrets behind his gaze. She felt a strange connection, one that was not fear, nor mere fascination, but something deeper, like understanding and empathy forming between two very different worlds. One evening, As moonlight poured through the grand windows of the hall, a sudden disturbance broke the quiet. A rival vampire lord known for cruelty and ambition had come to Duskfall Castle. Wordless and swift, he infiltrated the outer halls, seeking to exploit any weakness in Kale's domain. The castle's magic responded, the shadows shifting and whispering warnings. Ilara, unaware of the full danger, was in the kitchen preparing a late meal. She felt a sudden chill and heard faint footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. Her instincts told her to hide, yet she also felt a pull to face whatever threat had entered the castle. She grabbed a candle and moved quietly toward the sound, her heart beating with a mixture of fear and resolve. Meanwhile, Kale had sensed the intruder. His centuries of vigilance and power allowed him to detect even the slightest disturbance. He moved through the halls like a shadow himself, unseen and unstoppable. Yet when he reached the main corridor, he saw Ilara moving toward danger, and a sharp pang of concern cut through his centuries of detachment. "Ilara," he called, his voice low and urgent. "Return to safety, this is not your fight." But she did not stop. "I can help," she called back, her voice steady despite the chill running down her spine. "I can do something." Kale hesitated, torn between his instincts to protect and his acknowledgement of her courage. The intruder appeared briefly in the torchlight, a figure of menace and ambition. The shadows around him seemed to pulse with malice. Kale moved swiftly, intercepting the rival, but Ilara stayed close enough to offer assistance in small ways, such as distracting the intruder or guiding him into the castle's traps. By the time the confrontation ended, the rival vampire was forced to retreat, unable to overcome the combined courage, strategy, and intuition of Kale and Ilara. The castle itself seemed to sigh in relief, the shadows settling once more. Kale turned to Ilara, studying her with a mixture of awe and something more tender, almost human. "You were reckless," he said, though his voice lacked anger. "But your bravery, your heart, it is unlike anything I have seen in centuries." Ilara's eyes met his, filled with determination and a quiet pride. "I will not run from what I can face," she said softly, "not when it matters." Kale, for the first time in hundreds of years, felt a strange warmth, a mixture of admiration, respect, and something that stirred in the depths of his heart. He realized that her courage was not just about facing shadows or trials, but about facing him, the Vampire King, without fear. And in that realization, he felt both vulnerable and unexplainably alive. As the night deepened, the castle quiet once more, Kale and Ilara stood together in the grand hall, the moonlight illuminating their figures. Neither spoke, yet a silent understanding passed between them. The trials were far from over, the shadows still held secrets, and the castle's magic was far from tamed. And in that quiet moment, Kale allowed himself a fleeting thought he had not permitted in centuries. Perhaps the human who dared touch his heart was not just brave, but destined to change him forever. The night after the rival vampire's retreat, Duskfall Castle felt both silent and alive, as though it was holding its breath. The shadows moved with subtle purpose, whispering secrets that only Kale and Ilara seemed to hear. Ilara, though weary from the day's trials, felt a restless energy within her. She could not sleep, her thoughts consumed by the events that had unfolded. The castle was no longer merely a place of stone and shadows. It had become a living test, a labyrinth of courage, trust, and secrets that demanded more than bravery. Kale sat in his chambers, pale fingers tracing the edges of an ancient book. The rival's intrusion had stirred not just the castle, but something deep within him. Centuries of solitude, centuries of guarding his heart against betrayal, had been disrupted by a human who dared face the shadows, who dared enter his domain and touch what others would not. The thought of her, her courage, her steady heart, lingered in his mind, refusing to be ignored. That evening, Kale summoned Ilara once more. The grand hall was bathed in the soft silver light of the moon, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Alara approached cautiously, her lantern flickering in the quiet. She had grown accustomed to Kale's presence, to the weight of his gaze, yet she could never fully anticipate the depth of his thoughts. "Alara," Kale began, his voice unusually soft, "tonight you will face a trial unlike any before. This is not merely about courage or skill. It is about understanding and about trust." Alara nodded, her heart steady despite the tension that hummed through the room. "I am ready," she said quietly, though her mind raced with questions. Kale gestured toward the castle's inner sanctum, a place shrouded in legend and old magic. The doors were enormous, carved with symbols of forgotten power, and the air around them shimmered faintly with enchantment. "Within these walls lies the heart of the castle's power," he explained, "and the heart of my curse. You must enter alone and retrieve the crystal of reflection. It will reveal truths about you and about me." Alara hesitated. The weight of centuries, the mention of his curse, filled her with both awe and fear. "And what if I fail?" she asked. Kale's gaze softened, though a shadow of sternness remained. "Then you will learn more than you expect. But I have faith in your heart. It is strong, steady, and unafraid. That will guide you." Taking a deep breath, Alara stepped toward the inner sanctum. The doors opened silently, revealing a corridor of polished black stone. The walls shimmered faintly, as if they were not entirely solid, and the air hummed with latent magic. Shadows moved in patterns that seemed deliberate, forming shapes that echoed memories of the past, both sorrowful and triumphant. She moved carefully, lantern held high. Every step resonated through the corridor, echoing like a heartbeat against the stone. Whispers brushed against her ears, soft and melodic, yet impossible to understand fully. Some voices spoke of fear, some of guidance, and some seemed to plead for release. She listened, letting her intuition guide her, trusting the courage that had carried her through the Undercroft and the East Tower. At the center of the corridor, a mirror appeared, framed in blackened silver and etched with symbols that pulsed faintly. The crystal of reflection rested atop a pedestal before it, glowing with a soft, ethereal light. Alara approached, feeling the weight of centuries pressing against her chest. She reached for the crystal, and as her fingers touched its smooth surface, the mirror shimmered, revealing visions that startled her. She saw herself not as a maid, but as someone capable of great courage, wisdom, and compassion. And then, unexpectedly, she saw Kale. His centuries of isolation, his battles, his loneliness, and the curse that had bound him to solitude. His eyes, when they met hers in the reflection, were not cold but filled with longing, fear, and an ache that spanned lifetimes. Alara's breath caught. She understood now that Kale's strength was intertwined with a vulnerability few could ever perceive. She also understood the depth of trust required to stand by him, not as a servant, but as someone who could share the burden of his world. She held the crystal tightly, her heart pounding not with fear but with empathy and determination. As she turned to leave, shadows surged around her, forming shapes that sought to bar her passage. Their whispers grew louder, insistent, testing her resolve. She tightened her grip on the crystal, whispering softly to the darkness, "I am here to understand, not to harm. I am here to face what must be faced, and to help if I can." The shadows hesitated, then parted slowly, acknowledging her courage and sincerity. Alara moved through the corridor, the crystal glowing softly in her hands, guiding her toward the exit. She emerged into the grand hall where Kale waited, his eyes fixed on her with a mixture of awe and something deeper. "You have succeeded," he said quietly. Few could enter the heart of the castle and return unharmed. Fewer still could hold their hearts steady in the presence of its truths. Alara placed the crystal before him. "I saw everything," she said softly. "Your sorrow, your loneliness, and your strength. I understand more than I could ever have imagined." Kale studied her, and for a moment the centuries seemed to fall away. "It is rare for a human to see not just the surface but the depth," he said, and even rarer to face it with compassion rather than fear. You have done more than I expected. You have begun to touch my heart without breaking it. Alara felt a warmth in her chest, a connection she could not explain. The Vampire King, so powerful and untouchable, had allowed her a glimpse into his world, a world of shadows, sorrow, and unspoken longing. And in that glimpse, she saw not just the legend but the man beneath it, bound by centuries of curse and solitude. Kale's voice, quiet and measured, broke the silence. The curse that binds me is old and cruel. It allows me to feel, yet forbids me from fully acting on what I feel. Trust and compassion are dangerous, yet necessary if one is to break its hold. You may be the key, though neither of us yet knows how. Alara's eyes widened. The key, she asked. How could I? Kale shook his head slightly, his pale hair falling over his face. Not by power, but by heart. Courage opens doors, but only understanding and trust can unlock what centuries of solitude have hidden. You have already begun this process, though neither of us knows where it will lead. The night deepened, and the castle seemed to exhale, the shadows softening around them. Kale approached her slowly, his gaze lingering on her face, searching for something he had not allowed himself to hope for in centuries. Alara's hand hovered over the crystal, and in that quiet moment, a silent understanding passed between them. You are not like others, Kale said softly. You do not fear the darkness, yet you honor it. You do not judge, yet you see truth. It is rare. Alara's voice was steady, though her heart raced. I do not fully understand, yet I feel what you have carried for centuries. I wish to help if you will allow it. Kale's eyes, pale as moonlight, held hers. For the first time, he allowed himself a flicker of vulnerability. To allow it is to risk everything, but to refuse it is to remain alone. Perhaps it is time to see where this path leads. Outside, the wind howled through the towers, carrying whispers of the past and the promise of the future. Within the castle, two figures stood in quiet understanding, one immortal, bound by curse, the other human, fearless and compassionate. The shadows had tested them, the trials had shaped them, and now, in the heart of the castle, something fragile and extraordinary had begun. Kale extended a pale hand toward her, not as a ruler commanding a servant, but as someone seeking connection. The path ahead is uncertain, he said, but for the first time in centuries I do not face it alone. Will you walk it with me? Alara took a deep breath and placed her hand in his, feeling the cold strength beneath his skin. I will, she said softly. Not because I must, but because I choose to. In that moment the castle seemed to glow faintly, as though acknowledging the bond that had formed. Shadows shifted gently, the whispers softened, and the ancient magic pulsed in harmony with their hearts. For Kale, the centuries of isolation had begun to lift. For Alara, the darkness had revealed not just danger, but courage, empathy, and the extraordinary power of trust. And as the moonlight bathed them in silver, the Vampire King and the Maid stood together, no longer master and servant, but partners in a journey that would challenge every shadow, every curse, and every secret of Duskfall Castle. Yet even as they stood there, a faint whisper lingered in the air, a reminder that the castle's magic still held mysteries, and that the trials of trust, courage, and heart were far from over. The next step would demand even more from both of them, and the shadows would watch, waiting to see who would falter and who would rise. The castle slept uneasily that night, as if sensing the culmination of trials yet to come. Shadows stretched long across the grand halls, and the air was thick with expectation. Alara moved quietly through the corridors, lantern in hand, her mind focused yet alert. She had learned much from the castle, the shadows, the magic, and most importantly, Kale. She understood now that courage alone would never be enough. It was the heart, steady and true, that could face the unknown and prevail. Kale waited in the great hall, pale and still, though his eyes burned with an intensity that centuries had never dulled. He had sensed a disturbance, The rival vampire, the one who had dared challenge him, had not given up. He would strike again, and the castle itself seemed to prepare for confrontation. But this time, Kale would not act alone. Tonight, Ilara would stand by his side, not merely as a servant, but as an ally, a companion, and a heart he had come to trust. Ilara, Kale said, his voice low yet resonant, tonight you will see the true strength required to protect this castle, and to protect what we have begun to build together. Ilara met his gaze, steady and unwavering. I am ready, she said softly, though her heart raced with anticipation. Whatever comes, I will face it. The wind howled through the towers, carrying whispers of the past, as though the castle itself remembered centuries of battles, betrayals, and sorrow. The rival vampire appeared suddenly at the outer gates, shattering the stillness with a dark aura that radiated malice. His eyes glowed crimson, and his presence alone seemed to drain the warmth from the air. Kale's shadow stretched toward the intruder as he moved with fluid grace, his power manifest in every step. Ilara followed closely, feeling the castle's magic pulse beneath her feet, guiding her courage. She did not fear the enemy, but she respected the danger he posed. This was no ordinary challenge. It was a test of hearts, of strategy, and of trust. The rival struck first, his movements swift and precise, attempting to overpower Kale with brute strength. Kale countered effortlessly, yet he did not act recklessly. Each movement was calculated, a dance of centuries of skill. Ilara observed carefully, learning not just from Kale's power, but from his restraint, his patience, and his unwavering focus. As the battle unfolded, shadows twisted around the intruder, seeking to ensnare him, yet he resisted, feeding off the castle's unease. Kale's voice carried across the hall, commanding the shadows without fear. Ilara now, he called, and she understood immediately. Holding the lantern high, Ilara moved into the fray, not as a fighter, but as a guide for the castle's magic. She whispered words she did not fully understand, letting her empathy and courage shape the energy around her. The shadows responded, shifting to protect her and Kale, enveloping the rival in a cocoon of ancient light and binding energy. The rival struggled, his crimson eyes widening in surprise. He had underestimated the bond between Kale and the human who had touched his heart. The castle itself seemed to join in the struggle, stones humming with power, torches flickering with magical intensity. Ilara's steady heart guided the energy, her courage amplifying Kale's power, creating a force neither the rival nor the shadows could resist. Kale moved forward, his presence commanding, yet tempered with care. "Leave this place," he said, his voice like a blade of silver cutting through the dark aura. "You cannot win here, not while we stand together." The rival's strength faltered under the combined power of the Vampire King, the castle, and Ilara's unwavering courage. With a final, desperate attempt, he surged forward, but the shadows and the light held him, and he was forced to retreat, vanishing into the night. The echoes of his departure left a silence that felt almost sacred, a pause in time as the castle exhaled in relief. Kale turned to Ilara, his pale face illuminated by the flickering torchlight, yet his eyes were warm with emotion. "You have done more than survive," he said softly. "You have faced shadows, fear, and power without faltering. You have proven your heart, and in doing so, you have begun to lift the curse that binds me." Ilara's breath caught. "The curse," she whispered, her mind recalling the visions of the crystal of reflection, the truths she had seen and the sorrow she had glimpsed in Kale's eyes. "Can it truly be lifted?" Kale nodded slowly, his hand reaching for hers. "It can be. But not by power alone and not by magic alone. Only by trust, understanding, and the courage to face what lies within our hearts. You have given me that courage, Ilara. You have shown me what it means to feel and to hope." For the first time in centuries, Kale allowed himself to step closer, to close the distance that had always existed between him and another living being. Ilara's hand met his, and in that moment, A warmth spread through the great hall, subtle yet undeniable. The shadows shifted gently, no longer menacing but protective, acknowledging the bond that had formed. "You are extraordinary," Kale said, his voice quiet yet filled with reverence. "Not because of power or skill, but because of your heart. You have changed something in me that I thought centuries of solitude had made impossible to change." Alara looked up, meeting his gaze, her own heart full of both wonder and understanding. "I did not come here seeking to change you," she said softly. "I came to understand, to help, and to face the darkness. But I feel something stronger than I expected. I trust you, Kale, and I hope you can trust me in return." Kale's eyes glimmered with a pale light, reflecting centuries of sorrow melting into something new: hope, connection, and the promise of redemption. "I do," he said, his voice steady though laced with emotion. "For the first time I can. And I believe that together we can face whatever shadows remain, within the castle and within ourselves." The castle seemed to respond, the shadows retreating to the edges of the hall, leaving a space of calm and light. The moonlight poured in through the tall windows, illuminating the two figures standing together, bound not by fear or duty, but by trust, courage, and a shared heart. Alara felt a deep sense of peace, yet also excitement. The castle's trials were not over, but the most important journey had begun. The journey of two hearts, centuries apart, learning to face darkness together, and to embrace the light that comes from connection and understanding. Kale extended his hand fully, a silent invitation not just to walk the halls but to step into a life that had once seemed impossible. "Come with me," he said softly. "There is more to this castle, more to our journey, and more to what we can discover together." Alara took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of his hand, the pulse of his presence, and the quiet power of the castle surrounding them. She placed her hand in his, fully trusting, fully ready to face whatever came next. "I will," she said, her voice steady, full of conviction. Together, the castle seemed to glow faintly, the torches and shadows harmonizing with the strength of their bond. For the first time in centuries, Kale did not feel alone. The curse that had bound him, that had filled centuries with isolation and sorrow, began to loosen, not entirely, but enough for hope to enter. Outside, the moon cast silver light across the cliffs, and the wind carried whispers of the past and the promise of the future. Within Duskfall Castle, a new chapter had begun. Shadows and light coexisted in balance, guided by courage, trust, and hearts willing to face what others could not. Kale and Alara stood together in the great hall, the world outside quiet, yet full of possibility. They were no longer master and servant, nor merely king and human. They were partners, bound by respect, courage, and the beginnings of something far deeper. A bond that could withstand time, magic, and the shadows of the past. For Kale, centuries of solitude had ended, replaced by a connection he had long thought impossible. For Alara, the castle's darkness had revealed not just fear and danger, but the extraordinary strength of courage, empathy, and trust. Together, they had faced shadows, uncovered truths, and forged a bond that would guide them through all challenges yet to come. And as the first light of dawn touched the highest towers of Duskfall Castle, the Vampire King and the Maid looked out across the cliffs, feeling the weight of the past and the promise of the future. The shadows had tested them, the trials had shaped them, and the heart of the curse had begun to lift. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in centuries, Kale smiled. Not a cold, distant smile, but one that reflected hope, connection, and the possibility of redemption. Alara smiled back, understanding that courage, trust, and the willingness to face darkness together could create something eternal. And in that moment, Duskfall Castle, with all its shadows, whispers, and ancient magic, became not just a place of power, but a home for hearts brave enough to embrace the light beyond darkness.